What if the child you lost found his way back to you after 30 years? This is the story of Ellie, a mother who never stopped waiting for her son. A love that time couldn't erase, a reunion that would change everything. The sun broke through the lace curtains in the small kitchen of a weathered white house on the corner of Willow Creek and Main Street in Hartswood, Missouri. The kitchen smelled of brewed Folgers and cinnamon toast, the same way it had for decades. Eleanor, Ellie, May Carlisle, 74, sat in her favorite chair, an old rocker with faded floral cushions, clutching a photo that had grown soft at the edges from too much love. In the picture, she was just 21, her long auburn hair tumbling over her shoulders like a waterfall, her smile filled with hope. Cradled in her arms was a baby boy, swaddled in a blue knit blanket. His name had been Daniel. Her son. Taken from her arms before she could hear his first laugh, stolen by a choice she didn't fully make, only endured. That moment, that tearing apart, still echoed in her bones 30 years later. And yet, every morning, she made a cup of coffee for two. One for her. One for the boy she hoped still thought of her. Ellie had just turned 18 when she fell for Michael Hanley. He was tall, with sun-bleached hair and the kind of crooked smile that made you forget your troubles. He was 20, just back from basic training, and wore his army jacket even in the Missouri heat like it gave him purpose. They met at the local diner, the Sugar Spoon, where Ellie worked after school. He sat in her section every day for 3 weeks before asking her to go see Dr. Zhivago at the downtown theater. She said yes before she even finished refilling his coffee. They spent that summer tangled in each other's arms under starlit skies, carving their initials into trees, and talking about the future, how they'd buy a little house with green shutters, have 2 kids and a golden retriever. But war had other plans. Michael shipped out to Vietnam in October of '65. By January, Ellie was pregnant. Her parents, strict Baptists with a firm belief in shame and silence, were mortified. "You've ruined yourself, Eleanor," her mother whispered, face pale with anger. "You'll bring disgrace on this family." Her father didn't say a word. Just looked at her like she wasn't his daughter anymore. Michael wrote letters for the first few months calling her, "my girl," and promising they'd figure it all out. But then the letters stopped. 2 months before Daniel was born, a telegram arrived. Private Michael Hanley, Kia. Ellie collapsed on the kitchen floor, her hands cradling the place where her baby kicked. When Daniel was born on a warm May morning in 1966, Ellie had never felt so full of love and grief at once. Holding him felt like holding the last part of Michael, like maybe love could live on in blood and breath. But her parents had other plans. "You're not keeping that baby," her mother hissed. "We'll send you to the Ridgeway home. They'll find a family for him." Ellie fought. She screamed. She begged. But in 1966, a young unwed mother with no income, no husband, and no say was barely more than a scandal to be erased. They told her it was for the best. That he'd have a better life. She was sent to Ridgeway, a cold, sterile home for girls like her. They took Daniel just 48 hours after he was born. Ellie only saw him once after that, when a nurse snuck her into the nursery at 3 a.m., out of pity. That moment stayed etched in her soul. His tiny fingers curled around hers. His eyes, deep blue like Michael's, blinking up at her. "I'll find you someday," she whispered. "I swear I will." Ellie returned to Hartswood a shell of who she had been. Her parents never spoke of the baby again. She moved out at 21, renting a tiny apartment above the hardware store, and worked at the post office for 30 years. She never married. Never dated again. The pain made her wary. The world felt colder. And yet every year on May 16th, Daniel's birthday, she baked a cake. A small one. Chocolate with vanilla frosting. She'd sit at her kitchen table, light a candle, and whisper, "Happy birthday, my boy," to the empty chair across from her. She wrote dozens of letters to the Ridgeway home over the years, asking if they'd forward something to his adoptive family, or let her know where he'd gone. She never got a single reply. But in her heart, she believed. One day he'd come back. In the fall of 1995, Ellie noticed a change on her route. She still liked walking every day, rain, snow, or sun, but there was a new face on the street. A tall man in his early 30s, clean-cut, with serious eyes and a kind smile. He was polite, but quiet, always walking his dog, a shaggy black mutt named Rusty. He'd nod and say, "Good morning, ma'am," with a soft drawl. Something about him felt familiar. The way he crinkled his nose when he smiled. The way he held the door open without thinking. One morning, Ellie tripped on the icy steps of the pharmacy. The man was there in an instant. "Easy now, you all right?" he said, kneeling beside her. She looked into his face, blinking back the sharp pain in her knee. And in that moment, something clicked. Do I know you?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I don't think so. My name's Daniel. Daniel Parker. Just moved here." Her breath caught. Daniel. Over the following weeks, Ellie watched Daniel from afar. She learned he was a veteran, Navy, served in the Gulf. Quiet, kept to himself. No wife, no kids. Lived in a modest house at the end of Oak Ridge Lane. She ran into him often, almost like fate was nudging them together. She invited him for tea one snowy afternoon. He hesitated but then said, "All right. Sure." They sat in her cozy kitchen, sipping hot chamomile and sharing polite small talk. Rusty snored under the table. "You remind me of someone," she said after a pause. He looked at her with a soft smile. "People say I look like my birth mother. Never met her, though. I was adopted." Her hand trembled slightly. "Do you know anything about her?" Daniel looked down at his mug. "Not much. Just that she was young. Gave me up at birth. I tried to find her once, but everything was sealed." Ellie swallowed hard. "What's your birthday, if you don't mind me asking?" "May 16th, 1966. The room spun. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God!" she whispered. Daniel looked at her, confused. "What is it?" She reached into the drawer beside her and pulled out the faded photo. Her trembling hands passed it to him. "That's you, and me. The day you were born." Silence fell. Daniel stared at the photo, his hands shaking. His throat worked to form words. This is real?" Ellie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I've waited 30 years to tell you how sorry I am. I never wanted to give you up. They made me. But I've thought about you every single day of my life." Daniel's face twisted with emotion, shock, confusion, anger, longing. "My parents, they were good to me. But I always felt like something was missing. Like I was unfinished." He stood up and paced the kitchen. Rusty whimpered. "I don't know how to feel," he said finally. "I've dreamed of this moment, and now I don't know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything," Ellie whispered. "Just know that I never stopped loving you. Not for 1 second." He looked at her, and something broke, some dam held back by 3 decades of silence. He fell to his knees and hugged her. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice cracking. The weeks that followed were quiet, sacred. Daniel visited often. They talked late into the night, about his childhood, about her regrets, about Michael. She gave him his father's dog tags, which she'd worn on a chain under her blouse every day since 1966. They walked together in the park. Cooked Sunday dinners. He helped her fix the creaky porch swing. And every time he left, he kissed her cheek and said, "See you tomorrow, Mom." The town whispered, of course. But not unkindly. Hartswood, for all its smallness, had a big heart. People dropped off pies and handwritten notes. "You got your boy back," her neighbor Betty said one morning. "Lord knows you deserve it." One rainy day, Daniel brought Ellie an envelope. "It came in the mail," he said, handing it to her. "From the Ridgeway home." Ellie opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single page. A formal apology. A note acknowledging that due to recent unsealings of closed adoption records, The home had finally identified the connection. A simple line stood out. The mother and son have been reunited. May their years ahead be filled with peace. Ellie sobbed, not from pain, but from closure. 10 years later, Ellie passed peacefully in her sleep, holding the photo of Daniel as a baby. She was 84. At her funeral, Daniel stood in uniform, reading a letter she'd written him before she died. I waited 30 years to meet you, and only had 10 to love you in person. But I'd take 10 real years over a lifetime of wondering. You gave me back my heart, Daniel. And I hope, in some way, I gave you yours. He placed the letter in her casket, alongside the dog tags. And as the sun set on Hartswood, the wind rustled through the trees on Willow Creek Street, carrying the sound of a mother's love, long lost, finally found. Daniel didn't speak much about his adoptive parents at first. Ellie, ever gentle, waited until he was ready. One afternoon, they sat on the front porch, sipping lemonade while Rusty barked lazily at the squirrels. My mom, my adoptive mom, her name was June, Daniel said quietly. She couldn't have kids. Her and my dad, Roger, adopted me from the Ridgeway home when I was just 2 weeks old. They lived in Kansas City. Dad was a machinist. Mom worked nights at a textile mill. Ellie listened, nodding slowly. They were good to me, you know, he said. Strict sometimes, but kind. They told me early on I was adopted. Said it didn't change a thing. But kids know. You feel it in the spaces where answers should be. I used to look in the mirror and wonder whose eyes I had. Whose smile. You have your father's eyes, Ellie whispered. And my smile, I think. Daniel's lip trembled. I asked about my birth mother when I was 18. Mom said she didn't know anything, said everything was sealed tight. That the home had made it clear the mother didn't want contact. Ellie's hand flew to her mouth. No, God, no. That's not true. I wrote them letters. I begged them to let me reach you. He reached out and gently held her hand. I believe you. That's why I came here, to this town. I found the Ridgeway home shut down, but an old secretary gave me a hint. Said the woman who had me came from Hartswood. So, I came. Didn't even know what I was looking for. Ellie smiled through her tears. You found me, sweetheart. That's all that matters now. That night, Daniel sat alone in his house, flipping through the manila folder he'd compiled over the years. Faded records, letters never sent, and notes from private investigators. It had taken him nearly 15 years to piece together even fragments of truth. He remembered the moment he first stood outside the old Ridgeway home, its doors boarded up, windows broken, graffiti scrawled across the brick walls. It wasn't a place of comfort. It was a monument to sorrow. Inside, he had found nothing but dust and silence. But it haunted him, the thought of his mother, a frightened girl, forced to give him up inside those cold walls. The system had failed them both. And yet, fate had not. By spring of the following year, Ellie and Daniel were often seen together around town, shopping at Thompson's Market, attending Sunday service, laughing over pancakes at the Sugar Spoon Diner. Some people whispered behind their hands. Others simply smiled. One afternoon, Pastor Lucas approached Daniel as he was loading groceries into his truck. Son, the older man said, adjusting his glasses. I just want you to know, your mother? She never missed a Sunday prayer. Always asked us to pray for you. Even when folks thought she was just clinging to the past. She never gave up hope. Daniel swallowed hard. She's got the biggest heart I've ever known, he replied. I'm lucky to be part of it now. But not everything was easy. One summer evening, Daniel came by Ellie's house, visibly shaken. He sat down at the kitchen table, his hands balled into fists. I found a letter, he said. From my adoptive mom. She wrote it before she passed. Ellie waited, heart pounding. It was addressed to me, but tucked away in a Bible. She said she always suspected you had tried to reach out. Said she was scared that if I found you, I'd leave her behind. Tears welled up in Ellie's eyes. She wasn't wrong. He continued. For a long time, I was angry. At her. At the world. But reading her letter, I realized she loved me more than she feared losing me. She just didn't know how to share me. Ellie reached across the table and took his hand. You didn't have to choose between us, she said softly. There's enough love for both. He nodded. I know that now. Ellie had always loved the porch swing. Michael built it when they were teenagers, back when love was young and possibilities endless. One golden October evening, she and Daniel sat side by side on that swing, watching the leaves fall in a cascade of orange and red. I've been thinking, he said, about building something new. A little business, maybe. Fixing up old homes. Restoration work. Something that brings life back to forgotten things. Ellie smiled. That sounds just like you. He chuckled. What do you mean? You're a restorer, Daniel. You brought me back to life. On the edge of town stood an old oak tree with initials carved deep into its bark, E+M, 1965. Ellie took Daniel there one day. She ran her fingers over the letters, weathered but still legible. This was where your father proposed. We were just kids. We didn't know life would be so short, or so hard. Daniel looked at her, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a pocket knife. What are you doing? She asked. He smiled. Finishing the story. He knelt and carved another line below the first. E+M+D, 2025. In her final years, Ellie knew peace for the first time in decades. Daniel came every morning with coffee. They planted a garden together. Celebrated birthdays, Thanksgivings, Christmases with homemade ornaments and laughter echoing through her once lonely home. She even joined the town's senior choir, her voice soft but steady. She told her story once, at the library's Voices of Heartswood series. People wept. A young girl came up afterward and hugged her. Thank you, the girl said, for not giving up. After Ellie passed, Daniel received one last letter. It was sealed with red wax and tucked inside her jewelry box. Dear son, you were my first love and my final joy. If I could do it all over again, I'd fight harder, shout louder. But maybe it had to happen this way, so that you could find your way back to me on your own. Promise me you'll love boldly, forgive quickly, and keep planting things that grow. Forever yours, Mom. Daniel folded the letter and placed it in a frame beside the photo from the day they reunited. Years later, Daniel opened a small restoration shop in Heartswood called Ellie's Porch. It became a gathering place, half workshop, half sanctuary. People came with broken things, chairs, clocks, hearts, and left whole again. Above the counter hung a photo of a young woman with auburn hair and a radiant smile, holding a baby in a blue knit blanket. Every May 16th, Daniel baked a chocolate cake with vanilla frosting. And he lit a single candle. Happy birthday, Mom, he'd whisper, looking toward the sky. Some stories take a lifetime to tell. Some loves never die, even if the world tries to bury them. Ellie waited 30 years to see her son's face again. And in those final 10 years, she didn't just find him, she found herself. Because love, the real kind, is never wasted. It simply waits. Until the day it can come home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Stories TrueVibe, where true emotions live forever.